I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Thanks so much for having me, Anne.
Let's talk about air travel. Now, especially out of Pearson International, which is Canada's busiest airport right now, it is still a bit of a mess. I speak from personal experience. It has gotten better in the last couple of weeks, but it's still cancellations and delays galore. Now, what's interesting, Brett, is that the regulator, which is short-staffed, dealing with a massive backlog of complaints, hasn't handed out a single fine to carriers under the air passenger protection regulations during this whole latest round of travel chaos. What gives, Brett?
Well, I think this speaks to a bigger trend that we've talked about before, which is you have these regulators in place that are supposed to be supporting customers, being their voice when it comes to how these corporations act, and whether it was the Rogers outage or it's now the delays by Air Canada and WestJet, consumers are just not being compensated appropriately for when these companies fail. And the regulators, they need to really step up to make sure that that changes.
Yeah, and I was looking over some of the times that it takes, how long it takes to process any of these complaints. And it looks to me like, yes, they are dealing with a huge number of complaints, but also the time it takes them to get things sorted out seems to be much too long for, these types of headaches that travelers are dealing with on the regular. Now, I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about the fact that if you go across the pond, Heathrow Airport in London is reporting on the success of its passenger cap. So what they're doing there is they're limiting the number of departing passengers from Britain's busiest airport to, I believe it's 100,000 a day until September 11th. So, Brett, this begs the question to me. Are airlines short-staffed, or are they, like many other industries, simply overbooked?
Well, it's a great question, Anne, and I don't know enough about the aviation industry to answer that. But what I do know is that something has to change. And I think it's the responsibility of the regulators to work with the airports and the airlines to figure out what exactly that is. Now, if that London example does work, then perhaps what is happening right now, and I know Air Canada and WestJet both said they would pull back on flights, is that they're just booking too many people on them and they're still running over capacity. I think what they need to recognize is if this staff shortage is true, and if they don't have enough staff to manage these aircraft, they need to pull back on that. What I find interesting is that a lot of them are using a technicality when it comes to this passenger compensation, where instead of, according to the passenger charter that the government passed a few years ago, which entitles passengers to $1,000 of compensation when a flight is delayed 3 hours or more, and it's in the control of the airlines as to whether that delay happens. What they're saying is that these are safety issues that are out of their control, and so passengers aren't being compensated appropriately for it. And so it's a tricky dynamic that the airlines are playing here, where they're using some loopholes to try to get around it, and that may be why they're overbooked.
Yeah, and I think some customers have resorted to going through small claims court, maybe finding a little more success there, and certainly maybe finding that process is a little bit more expedient. Let's move on to another topic. This is something I've been wanting to talk to you about. We have to talk about the selfie that the CEO of US-based marketing agency Hypersocial posted of himself crying because of layoffs at his companies. Now, this is presumably to show how difficult this decision was for him to make, which I can appreciate, but I want to know, are you buying this, Brett?
Well, first of all, it became a bit of a meme. People started sharing that crying selfie. It went viral on the internet for a few days. But look, I think something you have to take into consideration when you're the CEO of a company, whether a big one or a small one, is that when you make a decision like this, it's not about you. It is really about the employees and the team that lost their jobs on that day. And to then make that post of you crying and explain how tough of a decision it was, I think a lot of people viewed that as insensitive to the current situation. But I will give the CEO of Hypersocial the benefit of the doubt here. When asked the employees that were laid off if they thought he was a good manager, most of them defended him. And so, like many things else, this isn't as black and white as it initially seems.
That's really good context for this story, but Brett, call me cynical. Hypersocial specializes in LinkedIn marketing strategies, and part of me wonders if the goal was to make it go viral, which it did, but maybe for some of the wrong reasons. This guy was attacked online for being tone deaf. I was thinking, read the room, please, with tech layoffs really dominating the headlines, making the situation about him. My question is, so this was supposedly to increase transparency, which I am 100% all for, but the post was pretty light on specific details. He said the layoffs were because of a decision that he made earlier this year that he stuck with for too long. What was that decision? He didn't bother to tell us, so it makes me wonder about ulterior motives.
Well, I think that's a great point. And they do make a big deal on their website that they love LinkedIn marketing, and they certainly accomplished that. He did go viral on LinkedIn. And I bet you, if we're being even more cynical about it, he probably brought more business in from that post than he lost. And I absolutely think you're right. And if you're going to fess up to this and say you made a big mistake, you have to really go into the details of that mistake. But again, it's just not about you. It was, of course, it's tough for you as the manager to let those people go. I don't have any doubt in that. But what it's really about is those employees that you let go, and you should be dedicating your time and energy to figuring out how you can help them land back on their feet and not crafting what I know personally, because we create a lot of content here at the Peak, is a post that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy to actually produce.
Yeah, leadership is all about those tough decisions. We get it. Let's move on here and talk a little bit about cryptocurrency. Usually when you and I talk about this, we focus on Bitcoin, which is the biggest by market cap. But the number 2 crypto, which is Ether on the Ethereum blockchain, which was pioneered by Canadians, by the way, it's making headlines, it's rallying. The final test of its move to a new, less energy-intensive system was a success, and it looks like it's ready to implement this as planned in September. What do you make of this, Brett?
Well, it's been a pretty dark few months for the cryptocurrency space, and this is a real bright spot in that. So, what's basically happening is that for a long time, for the entire history of Ethereum, they've operated on what's called a proof of work model, where we have a bunch of different computers that are solving really complicated math problems, and that allows them to then mine some Ethereum. Now, what they're moving towards is a proof of stake system, which will enable people to stake some of their Ethereum, and then that will allow them to mine more Ethereum and create trust in that blockchain because they have actually put that Ethereum up and staked it. Now, the big deal here is a few things. One, it's that they will be able to do more transactions at a time. And so you might remember from the great cryptocurrency boom of a few months ago that the so-called gas transaction fees were really, really expensive. This will bring those down, hopefully. So the next time that same type of surge in activity happens, you'll be paying less. And the second really important thing is for climate change. Right now, you have these mining facilities that are generating tons of carbon emissions that hopefully you'll see a pullback on with this new proof of stake system.
All right, so we'll have to keep watching this one. It's going to be fascinating to see kind of the makeover for Ether. Thanks so much for your time and your insight, Brett.
Thanks as always, Anne.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.